Imagine a world ravaged by the devastation of World War II. The Holocaust had ended, but the scars remained. For many Jewish survivors, justice couldn't come fast enough, and the official avenues, the Nuremberg trials, Allied prosecutions, seemed slow and worse, incomplete. Amid this post-war chaos, a group of Jewish survivors, fiercely driven by the need for revenge, decided to take matters into their own hands. These men and women, known as the Avengers, weren't just motivated by anger. They had a calculated plan to exact vengeance on the Nazis who had destroyed their families, communities, and lives. Let's dive into their story, from their formation in the chaotic aftermath of World War II to their most infamous act of revenge, poisoning over 2,000 German prisoners of war. But the Avengers didn't stop there. They aimed to make their mark on history, raising profound questions about justice, revenge, and moral righteousness. After World War II, a handful of Jewish resistance fighters and Holocaust survivors came together with one goal: to avenge the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis. Leading this group was Abba Kovner, a man whose reputation as a poet and resistance fighter in the Vilna ghetto made him an inspiring figure. Kovner had fought the Nazis during the war, and when it ended, he couldn't just stand by and wait for justice to be served. He believed that the Holocaust called for a unique kind of vengeance, one that went beyond the legal courtrooms of Nuremberg. Kovner wasn't alone. He was joined by men like Yehuda Maimon, another key figure in this underground mission. Together, they formed the Avengers, or Nakam, which means revenge in Hebrew. This wasn't just a ragtag group of rebels. They were driven by a calculated sense of justice. Their plan was as grand as it was audacious. They wanted to target and punish Nazis who had escaped justice by whatever means necessary, and they didn't care if those means were legal or not. By far, the most infamous action undertaken by the Avengers was their attempt to poison thousands of German prisoners of war in 1946. This operation was part of a broader strategy known as Plan A. The plan? To poison the water supplies of major German cities like Nuremberg and Munich, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in retribution for the Holocaust. But this plan proved too ambitious, and logistical challenges forced them to scale back. Instead, they set their sights on German POWs held in camps. In April 1946, the Avengers infiltrated Stalag 13D, a prisoner of war camp near Nuremberg, and poisoned the bread supply with arsenic. The target, over 2,000 German soldiers. The plan worked, sort of. Over 2,283 soldiers were poisoned, but miraculously, none died. Many became gravely ill, but the poison wasn't potent enough to kill them due to how diluted it became. While their mission wasn't as lethal as planned, it remains one of the boldest acts of post-war retribution. This wasn't the only method they used. The Avengers also sought to hunt down individual Nazi war criminals who had escaped the Allied authorities. Working with Jewish resistance networks, they sought out Nazi officers in hiding, aiming to bring them to their own form of justice, one that didn't involve trials, just punishment. While the Avengers were carrying out their acts of vengeance, official justice was taking its course. The Nuremberg trials, held between 1945 and 1946, were the centerpiece of post-war accountability. Nazi leaders were tried for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. 24 high-ranking Nazis, including figures like Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess, stood trial, and many were sentenced to death or life imprisonment. But to survivors like Abba Kovner, this wasn't enough. The Nuremberg trials targeted only the top Nazi officials, leaving countless others, those who had operated the camps, those who had enabled the machinery of genocide, unpunished. The Avengers believed that the sheer scale of the Holocaust demanded a broader response, a vengeance that extended beyond a courtroom and straight to the heart of every Nazi who played a role in the genocide. Governments, of course, weren't thrilled by this extrajudicial approach. The Allied powers were focused on rebuilding Europe and preventing further chaos. So the idea of rogue groups taking matters into their own hands was concerning. Behind the scenes, quiet efforts were made to rein in groups like the Avengers, and public statements emphasized the need for lawful justice through proper channels. There were fears that such vigilante actions could destabilize the fragile post-war recovery and reignite old hostilities. Yet, despite these concerns, little was done to actively stop the group. While the Avengers believed in their mission, their actions created divisions within the Jewish community. For many Holocaust survivors, their desire for vengeance was visceral, personal, and immediate. They had lost everything, and justice through the courts seemed like a pale, bureaucratic response to the horrors they had endured. In their eyes, the Avengers were heroes, taking justice into their own hands when the world seemed to move too slowly. But not everyone agreed. Some feared that these acts of retribution could provoke backlash, undermine diplomatic efforts, or even damage the fragile reputation of the Jewish people on the international stage. The newly forming government in Israel distanced itself from Kovner's group, as they were concerned that the Avengers would harm the Zionist cause, just as the world was beginning to recognize the need for a Jewish homeland. Despite these divisions, the Avengers left a mark on the collective memory of the Jewish people. They represented a bold, unflinching response to the incomprehensible loss that had befallen them. They were willing to do what others couldn't or wouldn't. At the heart of the Avengers story lies a deep moral dilemma. Their actions, while driven by a desire for justice, raise the question, where does justice end and where does revenge begin? The poisoning of German POWs, an act that targeted people based on their nationality rather than their individual guilt, blurs the line between righteous retribution and collective punishment. The ethical dilemmas go even deeper. In their pursuit of justice, the Avengers bypassed the legal process entirely. While the Nuremberg trials were far from perfect, they provided a legal framework for holding individuals accountable for war crimes. The Avengers rejected this framework, believing it to be insufficient for addressing the magnitude of the Holocaust. But can justice be served without due process? Or does revenge, no matter how righteous the cause, undermine the very ideals of justice that survivors sought to reclaim? The Avengers left behind a controversial yet undeniable legacy. Their story raises difficult questions about the nature of justice after unimaginable atrocities. While their mission was rooted in the deeply human desire for vengeance, it challenges us to consider how societies can and should deal with the perpetrators of mass violence. Should they be tried and sentenced through legal channels, or is there a place for extrajudicial retribution in the face of crimes as enormous as genocide?